How are y'all doing today?
Pretty good.
Awesome. So this is evolution of the modern day fairy tale. And this fine group of people who probably have more credentials than all of us combined in this room to talk about this topic. Google yourselves.
Oh, okay. Never mind.
And yeah, so they're just doing a comparison to the original fairy tales to the modern day adaptations that have happened. So if you guys would please introduce yourselves and we can get started.
My name is Joe Abriscato. I actually studied fairy tales and children's lit for my master's degree. I have a book coming out in the fall on the Gothic and the dark side of fairy tales and how that's been translated into modern young adult literature. So I've kind of spent the last 5 years of my life reading every young adult lit book I can get my grubby little fingers on. So.
Hi, my name is Angela, and this is my second year doing Comicon, primarily with English literature. That's what my degree's in, English literature-based things. You might have seen me in Mythological Creatures 101 and 102 these past couple of days. Just love fairy tales, and I love the pop culture that goes around with it. Megan?
Hi, I'm Megan. Oh, is this?
Okay.
Yeah, I really love fairy tales. I've been reading them since I was little, going from picture books to the novels to movies, shows, anything. And I love writing, so fairy tales are always great inspiration.
Hi, I'm Brianna. I don't know, I guess my whole life I've been around fairy tales. My mom had a daycare center for kids when she was younger, and you would not believe the amount of fairy tales you can pack into one building. But she managed to do it, and so my whole life I've been around them. And as I got older, I looked into more of the Gothic and kind of real substance of those fairy tales, and I've been enjoying it ever since.
Alright, I'm going to get us started, pretty much giving a slight academic base of where fairy tales started, where they've come to today. I really abhor public speaking on the fly, so I kind of wrote everything down. 10 pages or so. What's that?
It's formatted.
Oh yeah, no, it's perfect MLA format. So if anyone wants to check, oh yeah, footnotes, I got citations, I have everything is sound. And yeah, I've actually taken this and turned it into the introduction to the book that I have coming out in the fall, so you guys are getting a sneak preview of what's going to be in there. So hopefully you enjoy it. And if you have any critiques or questions or say, hey, that should be changed, let me know. I'm technically in the editing process, so I have to have that done by the 29th of this month. So I'd appreciate all and any feedback here. Awesome. All right.
What's the book going to be called?
It is called From Grimm to Gaiman, the dark and gothic and young adult literature and fairy tales. So it's coming out through McFarlane Press. I think pre-order is up now, according to a couple of people that their pre-order system is not working, which is great, but it should be by the end of the month. That will be straightened out, and November 15th is the release date. So that's that. I won't pitch anymore unless you ask me to. All right. So the state of modern fairy tales, and everybody can hear me, yes? Okay, good. All right. One of the oldest and most well-known literary genres is the fairy tale. Stemming from the oral traditions of nearly all cultures worldwide, these tales have been an integral part of children's upbringing for generations. Unfortunately, over the last 30-some-odd years, these narratives have become ghosts of their former selves, lacking the psychic and educational importance their classic counterparts are famous for. Filled with monsters and dragons, evil step-parents, fairy godmothers, princes, princesses, children, and adults, fairy tales are more than the simple entertainment meant to pass hours in a fantasy land. These stories, with their false brides and severed limbs and other gothic and fantastical elements, are used as important tools to teach children about themselves and the world around them. This in turn enabled the audience, be it children or adults, to become productive members of their societies, of their cultures and families, and to be able to maturely handle the crises and situations which arise over the course of one's life. These tales, according to Maria Tatar, are talismanic and Talmudic. Volumes treasured and fetishized, read to pieces. Held together by rubber bands, duct tape, rusting paper clips, they serve as companions and compass roses, offering shocks, terrors, wonders, as well as wisdom, comfort, and sustenance. Fairy tales are treasure troves stocked with everything a child needs to be nurtured, binding them to the stories through wondrous worlds, ancient magics, daemons, and dragons. According to Hunt, these tales are rooted in and have been deliberately directed towards stories not calculated to protect childhood from horror, or it might be said in expanding children's experience at too rapid a pace. Basically, they're not meant to sugarcoat anything, they're meant to include these specific things. Traditionally, the purpose of a fairy tale has not been to mollify a child's imagination, but to bolster it in ways that reality can't. According to Kate Bernheimer, it is precisely the inclusion of such motifs which makes the fairy world real. Fairy worlds are violent, and yes, there is loss. There is murder, there is incest, famine, and there is rot. All of these haunt the stories just as they haunt us. The fairy world is the real world. The unreal, the gothic, the horrific elements of these tales are essential and are necessary for the child to relate to the imaginary, the fantastic, and the magic found in the stories and the world around them. The interconnectedness of the real and of the fairy worlds is discussed in Bruno Bettelheim's introduction to the uses of enchantment. He argues that an understanding of the meaning of one's life is not suddenly acquired at a particular age, not even when one has reached chronological maturity. On the contrary, gaining a secure understanding of what the meaning of one's life may or ought to be, this is what constitutes having attained psychological maturity. And this achievement is the end result of a long development. Fairy tales are a necessity to a child searching for meaning in the surrounding world. Everyday occurrences excite him. There are a great number of situations which seem commonplace to an adult that are strikingly new and magical to a young child. In these ways, the real world and the fantastical world of fairy tales are seen as one and the same. Skills learned in fairy tales are applicable in the real world. Both are perceived as one and the same, are potentially scary and as awe-inspiring. Because of their content, the fears, the anxieties, the situations faced by the antagonists in the fairy world are wholly relatable to a young child. Readers and audiences depend upon fairy tales for personal growth, not as escape, but as enhancement of their own lives and their own skills. Reading is less a refuge from life than a quiet sanctuary, a chance to meet characters worth observing and to witness how they manage conflict, peril, and adventure. Children reading fairy tales are not searching for a way out of the reality in which they find themselves, but for rather a field manual on how to understand the surroundings that they are in. G.K. Chesterton succinctly states that a child of 7 is excited by being told that Tommy opened a door and saw a dragon. But a child of 3 is excited by being told that Tommy opened a door. While the subject of the sentence stays the same, they're both stories about a young child. The importance lies in what children of different ages can take away from that same story. As the child develops his own experiences, he'll compound what he has learned, adding to the knowledge gained and to the exciting moments of earlier ages. This assertion works to show that maturation and understanding is compounding experience. As such, a child of 7 years old has grown past the 3-year-old in terms of maturity. He has the ability now to open the doors on his own. That teaching moment was previously internalized and now can be built upon. Because of this, the teaching moment is able to serve as a platform. Knowledge of how to open a door enables Tommy to experience a more advanced skill, in this case possibly breaching that doorway and finding something new on the other side. Discussing her daughter's collection of cherished tales, Maria Tatar states that on the bookshelf are 7 tattered paperbacks, each one representing an important part of her identity. These 7 books, presumably collected over time, compound the different knowledge gleaned from the previous ones. As Tatar's daughter continues to grow, age, and mature, so will that collection of stories. More books will be added as she internalizes all she can from the previous tale. This necessitates a new one to satiate her appetite for knowledge of herself and of the world around her. Had Chesterton continued with his story describing what Tommy did next, stepping through the portal towards the dragon, closing the door, etc., he inevitably would have continued to demonstrate how compounding knowledge is handled by fairy tales. This intricacy enables a child to learn and to take away new elements from rereadings of the same stories, as well as new stories written in classic traditions as that child will grow. Recently, an unfortunate shift has occurred in general society's perception of the fairy tale. These once vital stories of the type collected by the brothers Grimm and Charles Perrault in the 1800s have become relegated to mere entertainment, being drained of the positive didactic elements and morphed into a reflection of mass society's view on how child's lives should be guided. Peter Hunt pinpoints this shift, stating that the last 30 years have seen an increase in reality-based stories, focusing on what adults perceive to be a child's real life. He writes that in the 80s and 90s, we saw a vast increase in the number of books dealing with social realism. These books were merely present-day retellings of classic fairy tales. Many parents believed the only conscious reality or pleasant and wish-fulfilling images should be presented to the child, that he should be exposed only to the sunny side of things. Basically, Disneyified everything.
It makes him frown like Grumpy Cat.
Yeah. Slight pet peeve. So, as such, gone all of a sudden were these terrifying aspects of dragons and monsters, abolished were the horrifying evil step-parents, non-existent were the well-known motifs of murder, dismemberment, death, and sexual violence. Who doesn't want to read those to a 7-year-old? Oh, most certainly. It was these elements that were abandoned for ideals that were more easily absorbed by a general population, who deemed that children needed to be protected from these horrors and not exposed to them. Found in their stead become watered-down versions of the classic tales, now completely devoid of any educational value other than bright colors on a television screen in most cases. Children are able to objectively synthesize a story. They're able to actually understand, perceive, and go more in-depth into these stories containing horror elements, such as vampires and monsters and dragons, due to the distance that is afforded by the fantastical elements than they are by a story revolving around horrors committed by human beings. The later describe situations that are too close to home for these children in many cases. Safe versions of a story do a great disservice to a child. They give the child no suggestions as to how life unfolds or how he is to grow and to mature. These safe stories mention neither death nor aging, the limits of our existence, nor the wish for eternal life. The fairy tale, by contrast, confronts the child squarely with the basic human predicaments. A child is presented with death, elation, starvation, and victories, and the entire spectrum of emotions and situations which humans participate on a daily basis. Lacking the knowledge of these experiences, a child's growth will be one-sided. All they will do is be entertained. The forced sanitization of fairy tales creates the illusion for children that life is completely sunny, that real life has no dragons, that it has no obstacles that need to be overcome. This is not the case. Bettelheim explained that in order to not be at the mercy of the vagaries of life, one must develop one's inner resources so that one's emotion, one's imagination, and one's intellect enrich each other and grow together. Bettelheim provides here the basic elements needed for balanced growth: the emotion, the imagination, and the intellect. It is these three elements which must be fed, enriched in equal portions. When only one or two sides of the psyche are developed and the other is neglected, there is going to be unequal growth. A child runs the risk of maturing in an unbalanced fashion. He understands there are obstacles to overcome, yet these new stories state that all is okay, that the dragons need not be defeated. The child becomes confused. He is not groomed nor taught to exercise all of his faculties. The problematic elements of many contemporary situational real-life narratives couched as fairy tales are discussed by Karen Coates. Attacking these problems, she states that the 20th and 21st century culture has degraded these once psychically useful tales into little more than a couple of rodents looking for a theme park, where ogres don't eat children as much as entertain them. The average Joe can have his princess without slaying any dragons, and a schoolgirl will be handed both her kingdom and her prince at the low cost of learning how to walk properly and how to style her hair. Such sanitizations render fairy tales less able to do their job. These neutered narratives prevent fairy tales from holding the meaning and importance to children's upbringing that they once did. The challenges faced by the main characters in these modernized narratives do little to expand the reader's unconscious cognizance of the real-world situations they are in. The modernization and simplification neglects the psychical importance of fairy tales. These recent reimaginings may stimulate one or two of the three important areas, but that leaves out at least one that is vital to their growth. Bettelheim states that the overwhelming bulk of the rest of so-called children's literature attempts to entertain, but most of these books are so shallow in substance that little significance can be gained from them. Fairy tales fill this void, the classic tales with the monstrous elements. They excel in being psychically stimulating, providing well-rounded, multi-intelligent children who can cope with reality. One of the most popular stories of the 20 years is the Harry Potter series. Not going to destroy it too badly, I promise. It includes ghosts and elves, it includes castles and graveyards, and as such, it's generally touted as a fairy tale. This series took years to write and to publish, taking the better part of a decade to reach its conclusion. Rowling's narrative is more of an epic series than it is an actual fairy tale. These tales are problematic. The Harry Potter series are problematic, as a child will need to read 7 books totaling thousands of pages in length in order to reach the epiphanies that those stories hold. If the child wants to take the moral of those stories to heart, he has to read hundreds of pages to do so, and will only discover the meaning years later as the sequels are published. In stark comparison, none of the brothers Grimm's collected tales are longer than 20 or so pages. The strength of the fairy tales lie within their ability to deliver the important lessons, their epiphanies, and their teaching moments in as concise a package as possible. So while the Harry Potter series does contain things that I feel children should learn, it does contain situations they may find themselves in or they can imagine themselves being a part of, their problem lies in the fact that they are thousands upon thousands of pages long. They may start the stories when they're 7 or 8. By the time they're 16 or 17, they'll finally finish the end of the books. The lessons they could have learned when they were the children are no longer applicable to their lives as late teenagers. So I do enjoy those series, but I don't think they should be labeled as fairy tales. With fairy tales, it's possible to read the tale and to comprehend its importance exactly when a child may need it. If the lessons offered by a tale have been internalized, the reader is able to build off of that immediately and move on to another tale, one with more formidable challenges and lessons to be learned. To Bettelheim, fairy tales in their traditional form can enrich a child's life, stimulating his imagination, helping him defend and develop his intellect and to clarify his emotions, be attuned to the anxieties and aspirations of life, and give full recognitions to the difficulties they are facing, while at the same time providing suggesting solutions to the problems which may perturb the reader. This can only be accomplished by stepping away from the false Disneyified tales from the Harry Potter Tolkienian-length books, and holding off on reading and viewing satirical versions of them, such as The Stinky Cheese Man, and I love The Stinky Cheese Man, until they have a base knowledge in the original tales. Simply naming a story, as is in The Stinky Cheese Man, doesn't necessarily provide all the lessons that person may have needed to learn. It's vital to have a grounded base before turning to the misclassification of modern fairy tales. One of the most important ways that this return to classic tales is achieved is through the re-inclusion of the horrifying and gothic motifs into contemporary tales. Fairy tales are important to children's psychical development because they provide concrete images of villains and monsters on which to project undirected anxieties and fears so that they might be contained and dispatched, to facilitate psychic integration and to assure the child of the possibility of happy endings when present trials are overcome. These villains and monsters and kingdoms with their princes and princesses are all classic elements of Gothic literature. In these stories, anxieties and fears are transposed into fantasy worlds where they become abstract elements that a child can apply towards multiple scenarios. The knowledge gained by these transposed situations in fairy tales and fantastical adventures can be utilized in many real-world scenarios a child may find himself in, because a fairy tale is known by the child to be a vastly different place than the real world. One such anxiety and fear that consumes many young readers is cannibalism. In long history in fairy tales, cannibalism is a great cultural taboo. Stories about monsters who threaten to consume, whether they're wolves or witches, sharks or aliens, continue to be a mainstay of much grotesque horror fiction aimed at both children and at adults. Monsters such as these act outside cultural and social prohibitions and represent the antithesis of a civilized humanity. The threat of being consumed, of personal non-existence, or of existence simply as a part of somebody else is deeply seated in society and found in many of the Grimm versions of the classic fairy tales, such as Hansel and Gretel and Little Red Riding Hood. Little Red Riding Hood's narrative is plagued with the threat of consumption by the wolf. Upon Red Riding Hood's arrival at her grandmother's house in the woods, this fear is actualized and it must be faced. The wolf has already committed an act of cannibalism. Jumping without a word on the bed, he gobbled up the poor old lady in order to trick Little Red Riding Hood in hopes of consuming her as well. Here the wolf is personified, having tied on her cap, donning the grandmother's clothing, and laid in her bed. As Little Red Riding Hood gazes upon the figure in the bed, she makes proclamations regarding the lupine features. What great ears you have, what great eyes you have, what great hands you have, what great teeth you have.
Really?
You guys learned something today.
Each of these exclamations received a verbal reply by the wolf, with the fourth accompanied by the wolf springing out of bed and swallowing up poor Little Red Riding Hood, fulfilling this fear of cannibalism. The series of events following the consumption of Red Riding Hood and her grandmother, and the subsequent killing of the wolf, demonstrate the persistence of this fear and its continued taboo nature. In reality, wolves do not wear clothing, lay in beds, nor speak the language of human beings. For these reasons, it might be argued that the act of the wolf eating Little Red Riding Hood is not truly cannibalism, as the wolf belongs to the world of animals, and Little Red Riding Hood belongs to the separate world of mankind. However, what must be taken into account is that in fairy tales, the human and the animal world are equally and mutually dependent. The violence and the suffering and the beauty are shared. Each separate world relies upon the other for its existence, and to deny this dependability is to rend the fabric of the fairy tales, removing from them the ability to evenly execute Bettelheim's psychic triangle. This collapsed boundary between the human and animal worlds is vital to uphold the emotional, the imaginative, and the intellectual triangle. I feel that the TV show Grimm does this really well. I'm not going to go off on that. That's
my job.
Their job. But I really feel that with the almost police procedural version style of the show, where you can watch each separate 35, 40-minute episode, you can receive some sort of knowledge out of it. You don't need to watch the entire series like you do Once Upon a Time to understand what the heck is going on. But that does have the collapsed boundary. It does have Nick working at a police station. It does have Monroe being a werewolf, living in the world around us. It does have them interacting with each other in what can be perceived as a very realistic, very true-to-life town, city situation. So that does very well. This boundary collapse is relived again and again throughout contemporary fairy tales, and the fear of being on the fodder end of the food chain is especially worrisome for contemporary protagonists. In many stories, the main character will encounter creatures or monsters who, under the guise of becoming new, true friends, plan on eating him and turning into one of their kind. Just like the wolf in Red Riding Hood, these creatures do not truly belong to the world of mankind. However, they don't necessarily belong to the world of animal kind either. Their existence is in an ephemeral place situated between life and death, which is often breached by the fairy tale hero. With the ever-present potential of cannibalization and the subsequent lack of being, these heroes and protagonists' identities become merged with the consumer, with the reader or the audience, completely altering and eliminating their individual identity, effectively erasing him or her identity. The hero's fears are transmitted to the reader, who follow the tales as they too search for identity. Children often desire to join a group that promises acceptance and identity as part of a we, yet they're not able to understand that in doing so, they'll obscure their own personality. They'll obscure their own personal identity. As individuals, they become consumed and they no longer are. This fear of victimization via cannibalism is the fear of becoming identityless, of losing one's human identity, shape, and existence. Be it evil witches, spectral ghosts, or ghosts, children can place their fears of lacking this identity into the fairy tales, enabling them to face life face the life around them as a maturing person. In modernized tales, the knowledge gained is often site-specific, for example, in grade schools, suburban neighborhoods, local malls, and thus become grounded in that specific location for the reader. The ability uses the knowledge elsewhere in their lives. The ability to use... One second. I'm done. Yeah. One more page, I promise. Reintroduce. All right. Yeah. Reintroducing the traditional narratives of the fairy tales is of utmost importance to bring back the psychic enrichment that's been absent from children's literature. Traditional Gothic texts have tended to give sinister inflection to fairy tale tropes and to motifs, combining elements of horror and the supernatural to produce situations in which the humble subjects can become the hero or a heroine, beset on all sides but ultimately, usually, triumphant. Gothic texts were greatly influenced by the fairy tales, exaggerating, twisting, and emphasizing specific elements. Gothic literature and fairy tales are now two distinct genres, and they contain similar tropes and motifs at their core, which stimulates all parts of a child's psyche. The emotional, the intellectual, and the imaginative aspects are all touched upon and fed upon. I'm just going to go off on a quick little tangent, because I basically destroyed what everyone thinks as of fairy tales today. One of my favorite authors and favorite writers is Neil Gaiman, and I honestly think that The Graveyard Book, if you haven't read that, is a perfect modern fairy tale. Granted, the book is about 250, almost 300 pages long. Every single chapter can be read individually and separately from each other. Each of those chapters has a complete story arc from beginning to end, where the hero goes through some trial, tribulation, learns a lesson about himself, and then triumphs. The following subsequent chapters, he can then build upon those lessons learned. And he does use all of the tools that he learned in pages 1 through 20, in pages 50 to 70, in pages 150 to 200. So it is possible to have these traditional fairy tales in today's modern world. It is possible to continue this tradition and to continue it on forward. And I really do hope that we are able to do so. I'm going to leave it off to these ladies now so they can get their fair share that I've hogged up most of this.
Well, first of all, I'm going to throw out a couple of things first off. You were talking about a field manual, like the fairy tales read. So, in case you guys ever want to read it, it's a book called Diamond Age. It's by Neil Stephenson. It's pretty much dealing with the same thing. The girl gets a sort of field manual on how to exist, how to thrive, or whatever. And she goes through little tests and everything. So it's very much like that motif. The fairy tales allow you to build upon your psyche, and then they allow you to grow intellectually and psychologically. So And I don't know if you guys have seen Patrick Rothfuss at the con. He has actually a picture book. He read a little bit of it last night, and it's dealing with like a fairy tale-esque sort of thing that just is not what you expect. So it's very much like introducing the gothic horror elements or whatever back into a fairy tale novel. And one other question I have is there any Disney movie that you do like? Like, do any of the villains like do anything for you?
I've always been a fan of Aladdin. And the 1001 Nights, that's always been my, I guess, favorite Disney film. Any other questions?
Yes, a second book, and it's longer than that, the picture book,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the same theme, and it's...
Yeah.
I'll have to find that.
So now we're gonna go a little bit into Once Upon a Time first or Disney? Disney,
Okay.
the dreaded Disney.
Oh, yeah.
Brianna's gonna talk a little bit about Disney and how it's sort of morphed.
All right, so how many of you guys actually genuinely like Disney? Raise your hand.
Oh,
All right.
so he's the devil
No,
now.
Yeah.
Guilty pleasure.
How many of you guys don't like Disney? How many of you share Joe's opinion? Okay. So the idea, okay, the idea with Disney is that on the surface it can be seen as something that is trivial and very childish and something that doesn't have a lot of substance. But when you look deeper into the different folds of how Disney portrays the different aspects, as an adult, you can watch it with your child and not get bored. I mean, as an adult, through your own life and through your own experiences, you start to make connections with what the characters are going through and little nuances that you see in each film or even the Disney books. Now granted, some of the Disney fan stuff is childish just because they want to take those child elements and really feed them to it. But the original stories and the idea behind it, I feel that they all carry some sort of message or else they wouldn't be created in the first place. They wouldn't be such huge blockbusters that we know of them now. If they were just something that was something silly, you would see them in a small little rundown bookstore, or you would see them in a rental movie place. You wouldn't see them on a huge TV screen or being sold in these really high-class book areas. But regardless, what I like to see is, I'm going to start from the beginning with what Disney was doing and then kind of go into what's happening now, because there's like a big thing happening with Disney right now. So in the very beginning, they're taking the Grimm fairy tales, and the Grimm fairy tales, as he was saying, were very horrific. They really got raw, and they really made the child think twice about what they were going to do. And so in that way, I feel that they were trying to scare the child into doing the right thing. And nowadays, Disney is making kids have hope and inspiration to do the right thing, and feel that it is a morally right thing to do, rather than saying, oh my gosh, I'm going to die if I do this certain item. Like for instance, the Hansel and Gretel story, like he had mentioned earlier, if you go into that forest and steal someone's candy, you will die, or somebody will try and kill you. And in the idea, there was a recent movie that wasn't quite so good, but it was still Hansel and Gretel. Regardless, now they have like guns and they're fighting people, and they have this huge twist on this original story that was just supposed to be kids don't steal. And so, I don't know, people like to go over the top with these types of concepts. But then there's other stories like with Little Mermaid. Nowadays, the Little Mermaid in the Disney movie, that is something that's been changed to make it a little more palatable for kids to watch while the adults remember the original story. In the original story, Ariel, if she doesn't get that kiss, she will die. She doesn't turn back into a mermaid. She doesn't have that, oh, anyway, it's okay. No, she's going to die.
She turns into sea foam.
She does. Yeah, no, at the very end, she does die. So there's not even a good ending there. It's just kind of like...
That's a great ending.
Well, see, all right, now I know why you don't like original Disney. It's not another bad.
Not to mention that every single step is 1,000 swords going into her feet.
She actually has to go through a severe trial to get where she wanted, and all she wanted was that true love. And the idea of true love is fictionalized and made to seem like it doesn't actually exist. And what she's going through is making every child's idea that something so out there does exist. Because when a child believes something exists, it's very hard to get them to say no, it doesn't. And Ariel just kind of embodies that whole idea, so children might be able to connect with her more. But it warns them if you go too far with that, if you give away something that's really special to you, like her voice, it was a gift. If you give that all away for something that might not be as great as you think it is, things won't turn out so well. Now, in modern Disney movies, they of course have things that do turn out well. There's talking fish, there's everything that a child would like. But that's how they kind of made it a little softer. Now, to end my little spot, it's Disney nowadays, there's been a huge revolution talking about women's rights, talking about how you can be independent, especially with the film Frozen. That was something that Disney really made an effort to change how it's being perceived.
Also, I think Brave too.
Yeah. No, you're right, yeah.
Like strong women, and it's sort of, you don't need to fall in love. You can be independent.
Right.
You can be sort of this champion for
Exactly,
change of the norm.
Right, when I was younger, I didn't like reading about the fairy tale princesses who were like, oh my god, I have to have someone come save me. No, I liked reading about the female princesses who would go out and fight a dragon on their own or do anything they want like that. Exactly, it's better. And so Frozen, they were saying that you can only have yourself to rely on. You don't have to go off, you don't have to risk everything for someone else. Do it for yourself. And that gives kids more of an inspiration to do something for themselves rather than just trying to grasp onto that thing that can help them become a better person, when really it's just showing them that they have to be dependent on someone else. Now in these stories as well, they do show that love is there and they have good male lead characters as well, so that's not excluding it. They're just trying to have kids realize that, again, you don't want to go after the first thing you see. So that actually ties back into the original Grimm stories with the idea that that prince, spoilers, that prince was going to kill her, right? I mean, it got very close to killing her with his own sword, everything. And that's exactly how the Grimm stories were. So I feel like Disney's trying to bring back some more of that slight fear in there. But again, the hope and inspiration is very much a part of what Disney is doing now. I'm going to hand it over to my lovely friend Megan.
No, hold on, before you say that, I would like to point out also that when stories like Snow White and Cinderella came about, I think that the world was wanting a sort of kinder world, and I think that's why a lot of this horrific sort of element disappeared, because they wanted a sort of let's smooth things over, let's make things okay. And I think that we go in cycles. We go in, it's going to be okay we can handle this now, and then like, no, we need to be okay again, and then okay, we can handle a little bit more grit. So I think that also helps with that.
Yeah, I think it kind of flows in the idea of what's happening in the real world at those times. Because at the times where like Snow White and all those kind of mellow stories came out, the world was very much in turmoil. Like there were wars going on, there were new things that were being done, everybody was afraid. So I think Disney, like you were saying, was really trying to soothe them and make them feel better. And also with the whole original Grimm stories, what was happening in that world, nobody really knew. Like the kids themselves, the adults, nobody knew if they were going to live to next week. They really didn't. It was all very much you have to live for yourself and make do with what you have. So the Grimm stories kind of exaggerated that. And now that we are in the age where we're able to find distractions from things like that and we're able to feel more secure in where we are, we're able to have different stories that can soothe us or make us escape from something else, while at the same time intrigue us and make us think of how we can solve our own problems. Now it's Megan.
Okay, so another thing, I think not just Disney, but other people too, but we're mostly going to talk about Disney, is they've been trying to show, do yet another take on these fairy tales by showing the other side, not just the good guy's perspective, not just the hero, but now the villain. So, as you probably all know, that Maleficent came out last week? Couple weeks? But yeah, that sort of thing. But I'm going to talk about who's watched Once Upon a Time. Nice. How many people like Regina, the evil queen? How many people don't like her? How about Rumpelstiltskin? Who likes Rumpelstiltskin?
Oh, maybe.
Who doesn't like Rumpelstiltskin? Oh, wow. Oh, my.
He's so bad, I just want to love him.
So, Regina, the evil queen, right? So in the original Disney movie, you don't really see much. All you know from that and the fairy tale is she hates Snow White because Snow White's prettier than her. Okay, so it's like, okay, she's prettier than me, I can't have anyone prettier than me, I need to be the most beautiful person.
That's a lame backstory.
So, Once Upon a Time gives her a bit more of a reason. I don't really want to give spoilers, but basically she gets a bit more reason to hate, even though, you know, depending on how you feel, you might not think it's that much better of a reason, but it technically gives her a slightly more developed reason than just, she's pretty, I don't like someone being prettier than me.
What is the reason?
Does anyone mind if I tell you?
No, tell us.
It's been out for more than a year, spoilers.
Okay, basically what happened is, well actually it's too complex, but like, okay, so Regina's mother, Cora, wants Regina to be the queen because Cora never got to be the queen.
She came this close.
Yeah, so so Snow White's mother's dead, other long backstory thing, watch the series. So Snow White's mother, Snow White's little girl, Snow White's father needs to marry a new queen. Well, doesn't need to, but then Regina's there. For other reasons. She shows up, she saves Snow White, and he's like, whoa, this lady's cool, she's young and pretty, let's marry her. So Regina is actually in love with the stable boy. Classic. But her mom's like, no, you can't be with him. You need to go marry this king. Like, you need to be the queen. You deserve to be a queen. Even really, the mother just wants to be, like, you know, the mother doesn't want to be a queen, so let's make her daughter do that.
So she said stage mom.
So Regina's like, she wants true love. So she decides she's going to run away with her true love, the stable boy. But Snow, little child Snow, happens to see them together, tells the mother gets angry, kills stable boy. Regina always hates Snow because Snow White was the one who told her mother and then the mother killed him.
And Snow is prettier than her.
So, you know, I guess like a little bit more reason other than just she's prettier, but it's still like, okay, she's a little kid. What? Like, shouldn't you be blaming your mother, the person who actually killed your true love, a bit more than hunting Snow White? Like, but it goes a lot more into her backstory than the original fairy tales did. And then Rumpelstiltskin. It definitely shows him rather than just the little short imp thing that likes to steal babies and make you guess his name. Makes him a bit more, I believe, to many people in the fandom, a lot more attractive in this show. And
Everybody knows his name.
Yeah, if I could just go off from what you said, do you guys think it's kind of weird that now all of our favorite characters are the evil ones? I mean, all the ones that are sneaky, all the ones that steal stuff, suddenly we're like, that's okay.
I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. I think that we can relate to a lot of these people, or a lot of these so-called villains that have good and evil in them, just like we do.
Right.
Yes.
You have a question?
So I just wanted to say, because Regina and Rumpel both had a reason to be evil.
Yeah.
Like Rumpel was, spoiler, trying to find his son, and so the only way to do that was to be evil and get all of these things in order.
yeah, and I know a lot of people feel like Rumpelstiltskin had more of a reason for the bad things he did than Regina did. Because she just she killed way more people than he ever did.
Yeah.
So,
And the thing that I like about Rumpelstiltskin also is that, so his pain goes back way, way far, like to his childhood. And the fact that people hold on to their pain and that it just changed them into this person that you're like, oh, he's definitely evil. No, not necessarily.
Right.
It's just like,
Silver linings.
Circumstance versus.
it's circumstance, it's nature versus nurture and all that.
I think part of it is with us loving villains, because I mean, one of my favorite characters is Loki. I love him to death. And it's because we can see the human in them, we can understand their pain, because some of us we've gone through something like that. And it's like, also with the redemption, you want to see them, you know, make up for some of the bad that they did, even if it's completely justified. It's that redemption story, at least for me.
Especially for Rumpelstiltskin, he really tries to redeem himself later. And I mean, if you think about it, like his methods are bad, but his ultimate goal, find his son, it is good.
I was going to have a side comment about Cora, though. What she wanted as a miller's daughter was never to bow to anyone.
Yeah, that's
So
true.
It's independence.
That's true.
Independence, having control, will of oneself.
Yeah, she started out, well, I feel like she started
out that
out,
way.
yeah, she started out just wanting to like, not having to bow down to anyone, being
Yes.
able to like, be in control of her own life. But like later on, she just got more obsessed with having power, so that like, it shows to people, there's the warning story in the fairy tale, like, look, it's not such a bad thing to start out this way, wanting certain things or having certain qualities, but you can change, like, don't end up like this person.
Yeah, like seeing these types of TV shows and films and everything, it's kind of like those books where it's you choose your own adventure, right? You're like, oh, hey, I'm going to go off with this person and see what happens there. And you have a bunch of different tales you could go on. By watching these TV shows and relating to it, it's kind of like you're, that person's kind of like me. Maybe I shouldn't hold on to that grudge so long. So
And one of the things for Once Upon a Time that they're doing is that they're melding the stories together. So you crossing the stories over that you wouldn't necessarily have from one to the other. And that's sort of another evolution that we're talking about. Like, what?
It's pretty much they're turning all fairy tale world into one universe.
Yeah, and Rumpelstiltskin is like a really good example of that crossover, since he's like,
because he's in
three
every
different
single
characters.
story, it
Yeah.
seems like. Because everybody comes to him and they involve, and all of them are pretty much involved in some way in his life. So I'm going to mention, you want to say any final? Okay, since we're swiftly running out of time, I'm going to talk a little bit about Grimm as the last one. Because Grimm is sort of what he already said, like episodic. It's going back to that sort of horror element, in case anybody has not seen Grimm. It's about Grimm fairy tales, the characters in the fairy tales actually living in the same universe as humans. And that's sort of what Joe talked about whenever he said that the human and the animal are interdependent with each other. And it also brings in the gothic sort of horror elements, because a lot of these things are fairy tales that we know, but they also bring in folklore, and they sort of intertwine it into our universe. I spoke about a Filipino folklore aswang this morning, where it's talking about a monster that sort of eats people and it eats unborn children. So, and they integrate that into our world, because there are people in the Philippines that still believe that exists. You know, and these things are called vesin in the Grimm universe. And stories like the Three Little Pigs and the wolves, they're Blue Button and Bauerschwein, they're actually feuding with each other. And that's why sometimes the wolves are killing the Bauerschwein for sport, and sometimes the pigs are getting their revenge and killing the blue bots. So it's adding that more of a humanistic element, and sort of that everything is not all happy sunshine. And the fact that they put it in a real life, they put it in Portland, where everything is, you know, keep Portland weird. It's obviously, you know, living up to that reputation, because that's where we see most of these sort of vesin interact with each other and sort of come about through Nick being a Grimm. And that's why they made fairy tales and stories, and they wrote them down in books because they were actually hunting them to protect the human race. So that sort of leans into that. It's about 10 minutes until, so I'm going to open the floor for questions if anybody has any.
Just curious, worst offender as far as Disney?
Worst offending story?
Yeah.
Go in and look at the catalog. One of the stories that I probably dislike the most is Beauty and the Beast. Don't get me wrong, I like the music. I can't get away from saying that I don't enjoy it, because I do enjoy some of the songs from that. That being said, they completely neutered the Beast in the entire story. They really, they made him virtually powerless the entire time. They completely destroyed his original intent in the original tales. It's just, the storytelling has so many holes in it, as to motivations on both Belle and the Beasts, as well as Gaston. It's just, I feel that if they had actually stayed true to the original tales, the story itself that they were trying to tell would have been better. But yeah, that's probably my least favorite one. Yeah, I saw like 5 hands go up at the same time.
This kind of relates to the last question. You had mentioned that during World War II, the Snow White came out as kind of a cultural artifact of people wanting a kind of a gentler universe. So I kind of wanted to contrast that to see what you guys thought of some things that came from Europe. Narnia, is a dark, much darker world. And Sean Kafka's Beauty and the Beast, and what you thought about that.
Well, I think it all just depends on the author as well. I mean, these people who had their own ideas and imaginings of what they wanted their reality to be like, or how reality they imagined in their mind to be like. So it doesn't always have to do with cultural norms. It just so happened that now, in certain situations, the Disney enterprise was really going off of that because they had already had smaller successes with children's media and such like that, that they figured they were able to capitalize on these tales that were a little more gruesome to kids than to adults. So I think that was just, it's very specific to who you address it to.
I also think that, as you mentioned, Narnia, the European, the Germanic tradition is much more deeply rooted overseas, because that's where the traditions have started. So they were much more accustomed to those tales than the United States and the Americas were. We don't necessarily have that tradition built into our own culture, so they were able to more easily handle the darker, the scarier, the more horrific elements that Narnia will have, and other such tales.
Yeah, I was just talking about the mythical creatures and all of these folklores that they're telling in like Eastern and Western Europe or whatever. They are still told to this day as warnings to children, and they're very gruesome. Like, you're going to be eaten, you're going to be killed. If you do something bad, they're going to come and get you, and we can't protect you. So I think that since it's an older culture, we're more of a newer established culture than that culture. So
I think maybe also it might have something to do with, unless you lived in Hawaii, the war wasn't really taking place in the U.S. But if you were a child in the U.S., that was terrible.
yeah.
Well, maybe they wanted to take that terror and channel it into something fake.
That's exactly it. That harkens back to I mentioned the distance that the fairy tales provide. These children were seeing the horrific bombings almost daily over in England. And having those tales in order to project their own fears into, to provide that as an escape, that really did help them get through these situations. And in the case of the Narnia books, there were happy endings, so it would provide them with the ability to say, okay, the shit hit the fan, but we're going to get through this, just like the children did.
It's just a story then. I mean, it's like with Peter Pan. Peter Pan was originally supposed to be an angel figure, And those kids he took up to Neverland, those kids had actually died during the war, during those bombings, and that's why they were the Lost Boys, because they were dead. They would never be able to return back to their house or their homes or their families. They never grew up, exactly. And so they turned, because these kids, they would see other kids die. And the whole idea with Peter Pan is it took that and turned it into a story saying, no, you're going to go to someplace really cool and look at, there's mermaids and pirates, and it's a story now rather than a harsh reality they have to live with and be scarred with for life.
And like with Narnia, Aslan is a god figure, so he sees everything all the time. So even when the kids come back, he knows what the kids have been through, and he knows that the kids have been going through this without their father still, and the bombing is still in England, and all of this other stuff. And so and C.S. Lewis did that on purpose. He wanted kids to understand that God would always watch over you, even when you thought he was gone and the bombings were happening and you were scared and you saw family and friends dying on a daily basis. Like, he was trying to kind of root it back into that, like, European Christianity idea again.
Yeah, not even with, like, religious undertones like that. Even if kids weren't religious, it still has that idea that someone or something is watching them. Not specifically, oh, this God or that God, because then it relates to all children of all religions, or non-religion even, just someone other than your parents or your friends. There's someone there to comfort you and make you feel as though, okay, it's going to be all right.
Who doesn't want a giant fluffy lion?
No, I mean, come on.
Lion.
One of the back sheets.
Yeah, I think I saw you and then like,
Okay.
okay,
Yeah.
so you.
Okay, so this is a question for all four of you. For the children today, what's your top 3 favorite fairy tales that you recommend?
Grave Red Book, as I mentioned earlier. I'm a huge fan of the Juniper Tree story by the Brothers Grimm. You can find that pretty much any version online. And number 3, Coraline by Gaiman. The thesis was on Neil Gaiman. I'm a huge fanboy, so, but yeah. But I truly think that Grave Red Book and Coraline are very, very important for children to read. Not the movie, the book.
I'm a huge Neil Gaiman fan as well, but I don't know if it's necessarily considered a fairy tale, but anything that Shel Silverstein writes, it's sort of a little bit macabre and sort of like, and it's in small doses, like it's where the sidewalk ends. Like The Giving Tree is about, you know, loss, and it's about like giving of yourself and sacrifice and everything. It's not necessarily, I don't know if you would consider it a fairy tale. Would you consider it a fairy tale? Like, it has fairy tale elements, I would say.
But imaginative at the very least.
Yeah, but he's good at saying what's real and what's there. So.
I don't know if I can pick 3 exactly, but there's, like, Aladdin was always one of my favorite Disney movies, and I really also like the what's it called? The 1001
Nights.
Thank you. Yes, that was really good. And there are, you know, different levels for different ages of reading it. There's like the simple like picture book ones and everything. Another thing I really enjoyed personally as a child was different versions in picture books of the same fairy tales. Like, for example, the one that I can think of right now is Cinderella. There's the sort of normal Cinderella picture book, like the generic, like for more little kids, softer one. There's ones that go a bit more into the darker side with them like chopping off their toes and stuff. And then the ones I really loved were the like multicultural ones, like there's like do one for Indians or Native American styles, or like just bringing in like, here's this fairy tale. It like really showed how the same story can like go like global. Like you can see this in different cultures in different ways. It doesn't have to be the exact same thing with just a different color person. You can actually take like these cultures and have similar stories. So I think that's important for kids to see.
I think I'm going to go back to more classic, but like, well, yeah, okay, this one's pretty classic. It's The Princess and the Pea. I really liked that one. I had this whole big book of fairy tales when I was younger, and now that I think about it, that story is really relevant to a lot of people nowadays. Like, just one small little thing can bother you so much, and you have to just kind of like let it go. You have to just kind of like relax and not let it bother you to the point of that it did in that story. But So that's one for smaller children, I think is a good idea. And parents can take the moral out of that story and really make it relevant to the kid. And another book I think is actually very, very good is The Giver. When I read that book, I read it in, I guess, 7th grade or 8th grade. And I borrowed it from my library. The school library. I'm sorry, I forgot to return it. But I'm a proud owner of The Giver now. And
Should be called the taker.
Anyway, I don't know, it was just something that I really enjoyed. And really, no, we don't. And really quick, my last one I'd like to have children read or experience is The Princess Bride. That one, I think there's so many elements in that one. By the way, the artist Karen Hillian is here, and she has a Princess Bride thing that she made. Fun. Okay,
Terry
done.
will be here tomorrow.
Yes, he is going to be. Okay, I know that we're running, it's time, but if you want to
We'll be
like
hanging around.
come here and
Yeah,
like
come to
ask
us.
questions for
Yeah,
us.
come and talk, we'll hang out in the hallway.
Okay.